Hare Krishna. So we are resuming a discussion from chapter 15, verse 12. Yadaditagatam tejo jagadbhasate khilam yadchandramasi yadchagnau tattejo vidhimamakam. The splendor of the sun, which dissipates the darkness of this whole world, comes from me, and the splendor of the moon and the splendor of the fire are also from me. So, in the previous set of verses, where Krishna had explained the process of transmigration, he had also indicated that there are two kinds of people. There are those that are able to see this process of transmigration from the eyes of the scriptures, and there are those who cannot. So, one may say that for those who cannot, is there any hope? And Krishna says, yes, there is hope. So in 4 verses, 12 to 15, Krishna speaks about how he can be seen by those who are materially entrenched. And very similar to the 10th chapter, where Krishna speaks about his vibhutis for those who are unable to see beyond the material conception. So here he talks about 3 things: the sun, the moon, and the fire. And he says that he is the basis of these 3 things. And why does he pick these 3 specifically? Because they are essential elements of survival. So the actions of the jivas pertaining to enjoyment are accomplished by the light of the sun. Then the cooling rays of the moon, they are pleasing to the living entities, and they also nourish the vegetation. And the fire is externally used for cooking and internally for digestion. So with these 3, the jiva enjoys the various pleasures that are according to him by his karma. So what Krishna is saying, that all the means of material enjoyments are made possible by him only. Even if a jiva is completely attached to material enjoyment, he can appreciate Krishna's hand behind this and thus make spiritual progress. Next verse. Verse 13. Gama vishcha bhutani dharyamyaham ojasa Pushnami chavashadihi sarva soma bhutva rasatmakaha. I enter into each planet, and by my energy they stay in orbit. I become the moon and thereby supply the juice of life to all vegetables. Same point is being further expanded. So there Krishna had said that he was the basis of supporting the moon. Here he makes the same point again, that he actually becomes the moon, which means the moon is an expansion of him and supplies the juice of life to all vegetables. Essentially what it means is that Krishna is the source of our sustenance. Then he talks about how all the planets are supported by him. So when we look into the sky, we see so many heavenly bodies. But when we see that they are all maintaining a very, very fixed orbit, we don't see the sun crashing into the earth, we don't see the moon crashing into the sun. So they're all following a very rigorous law. They're physical laws, but nevertheless they're very rigorous laws. One will also think about the lawmaker. That why do these planets not fall from their orbits? How do they float even though they are so gigantic? So by meditating in this way, one begins to see the hand of Krishna. So once again, these points were made in the chapter 7. Krishna is briefly touching upon them to bring more context to the point that he's making. That even those who are not spiritually inclined have the opportunity to see him by seeing his hand behind the various material phenomena. Next verse. Verse 14. Aham Vaishvanarvo Bhutva Praninam Dehamashritaha Pranapana Samayukta Pachamyanam Chaturvidam. I am the fire of digestion in the bodies of all living entities, and I joined with the air of life outgoing and incoming to digest the four kinds of foodstuffs. So in the 12th verse, Krishna had said that he is three things, amongst other things, but there he says three things: the sun, the moon, and the fire. So in the 13th verse, he talked more about him being the moon. In this verse, he talks more about him being the fire, and in the next verse, he will talk more about him being the sun, or the facilitator of all activities. So here Krishna says that he is the fire of digestion. So there's a fire that burns externally, but there's a fire that burns in us, that digests the food, and that is known as the Vaishvanaro. So the Vaishvanaro is essentially created by the mixture of the incoming, the pran and apan. So the outgoing is the pran and the incoming is apan, and together they stimulate the Vaishvanaro, or the fire of digestion. So just like when you have a fire and a campfire, so in order to stimulate it, you kind of give air to it. So similarly, the pran and apan, they stimulate the fire of digestion, and Krishna says that he is that. Then he says that he is the four kinds of foodstuffs. He says that Anam Chatur Vidham. So the acharyas say the four kinds are the bhakshyam. The bhakshyams are those that are chewed with the teeth. Then there is the bhojyam. The bhojyam are those that are savored by the tongue without using the teeth, like bread or roasted chickpeas. Then there is the leham. Leham is the one that is licked or slurped. So this is like soup and porridge. And then there is the chosya. Chosya is the kind that is sucked, like the lollipop or the raw sugar or honey or milk rice, in which the chewed portion is discarded. So these four kinds of foodstuffs are essentially digested by the Vaishvanar fire, which Krishna is. So externally as moon, Krishna is stimulating the vegetables, and internally as the fire of digestion, he is helping us digest those vegetables. So that way we see that Krishna is all pervasive. Next verse. Verse 15. This is a fairly famous verse. Sarvasya chaham hridhi sanivishto matah smritir jnanam apohanam cha vedesya cha sarveraham eva vidyo vedanta kritveda viddeva chaham. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me comes remembrance, knowledge and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas I am to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of the Vedanta, and I am the knower of the Vedas. So the first half of the verse, the first two lines, talk about Krishna facilitating our enjoyment. So in the 12th verse, Krishna has spoken how he was the sun, moon and fire, and how the sun facilitates our enjoyment. Here Krishna is expanding upon it. So three things that he talks about. He says that remembrance, knowledge and forgetfulness. These three together facilitate our material enjoyment. So take the example of somebody getting burned by fire. So by remembering that fire can burn, the person will avoid doing that in the future. Right? So that's how that remembrance helps. Forgetfulness is, think about a person being in a bad situation, And if the person continues to meditate on that, then his future life will be completely held hostage to one bad situation. But Krishna helps us forget so that we can move on. And knowledge is being able to know this difference, when to remember and when to forget. So we remember the palatable food that we have eaten. We forget about the bad situations that we are in. And if we extend this, then Krishna helps us forget about our previous lifetimes. Because if we carry all the baggage from our previous lifetimes, it would be impossible for us to survive. But he helps us remember things in this lifetime so that we can knowingly make decisions that can help us enjoy. Now, in the second half, Krishna is basically summarizing why is he saying this? That why is he saying that he is everywhere? Because he wants us to know Krishna. He wants us to know that we are completely dependent upon him. So we are dependent upon Krishna in every aspect of our existence. So how can we now know Krishna better? Right? Now earlier he has been talking about empirically, that we see ourselves enjoying food, and then we meditate on Krishna being the fire of digestion, or we see plants being cultivated and we meditate on Krishna as the form of moon cultivating that plant. But what if now we want to move to the next stage? Krishna says that you have a way to know me better. Why? Because I am the knower of the Vedas, I am the compiler of the Vedas, and I am known by the Vedas. So essentially Krishna is asking us to seek the knowledge of the Vedas to know him better. The Vedas are infallible because they come from Krishna, which is also infallible. And because the Vedas come from Krishna, they also have the ability to deliver Krishna. So, if you remember in the earliest part of the chapter, Krishna had said that we can cut down this tree of samsara, of repeated birth and death, by knowledge and discrimination. So the knowledge that he is talking about, he speaks over here. That is the knowledge that he wants us to develop. That Krishna is the knowledge that is delivered to us through the Vedas. So Prabhupada says that in all the Vedic literature, beginning from the four Vedas, Vedanta Sutra and the Upanishad and Puranas, the glories of the Supreme Lord are celebrated. By performance of Vedic rituals, discussions of Vedic philosophy and worship of the Lord in devotional service, he is attained. Therefore, the purpose of the Vedas is to understand Krishna. And when we understand Krishna, then we can cut down this tree of samsara, of repeated birth, death and rebirth, and go back to the spiritual world. Next verse. Verse 16. Dvavimau purushau loke ksharaschaksara eva cha kshara sarvani bhutani kutasto ksharochate. There are two classes of beings, the fallible and the infallible. In the material world, every living entity is fallible. And in the spiritual world, every living entity is called infallible. So with this, Krishna begins a new section in the chapter, which is famously called the Trishloki Gita. So he talks in 3 verses, 16, 17 and 18, about Sambandha Gyan, or the relationship between Jiva and Krishna. So if you remember in the 10th chapter, from verse 8, 4 verses, was the Chatushloki Gita, where Krishna talks about again the same Sambandh, the relationship between Jiva and Abhiday, how the relationship is manifested or attained, and Prayojan is how does Krishna reciprocate. So here in 16 to 18 in the Trishloki Gita, Krishna will talk about Sambandha Gyan, what's the relationship between him and the Jiva. In the verse 19 he talks about Abhiday, and in 20 he talks about prayojan, or the enjoyment of the jiva in that relationship. So in this particular verse, Krishna is introducing us to ourselves. He says that the jivas fall in two categories, kshara and akshar. So kshara is fallible and akshara is infallible. So the jivas that are in the material world are fallible because they are prone to come under the control of the inferior material nature. And the jivas in the spiritual world are infallible because they never fall from their position of their relationship as a servitor of Krishna. Next verse. Verse 17. Uttama purushastvanya parmatmatyudartaha yo lokatrayam avishya vivartya vyaya ishvaraha. Besides these two, there is the greatest living personality, the Supreme Soul, the imperishable Lord Himself, who has entered the three worlds and is maintaining them. So previous verse, it talked about the jiva. This verse talks about Krishna. So when he says besides these two, so he's talking about the two kshara and akshara. So the clear message here is, even in the liberated stage, the jiva is distinct from Krishna. So this defeats the Mayavadi philosophy that says that in the liberated soul, the jiva becomes the Supreme Lord, right? So Krishna is saying that besides these two, the kshara and the akshara, the conditioned and the liberated soul, there is me. And unlike, so the kshara and the akshara, for the most part, they live separately. The liberated souls live in the spiritual world, and the conditioned soul live in the material world. Now, in rare circumstances, for the purpose of preaching, the liberated souls do come to the conditioned material world, but as a rule, they live separately. But Krishna says he lives in both the worlds. He lives in the spiritual world, and he has also entered into the three worlds. So the three worlds is Bhur-Bhuva-Swa. So these are the three aspects of the at least the middle. He essentially emanates, supports the entire material world, but here he's speaking about the Bhur-Bhuva-Swa, the three middle planets. So the point he's making is that he is unique. He is different from the kshara and akshara, and he exists both in the material and spiritual. How is he? What is he doing? He is maintaining them, right? So he is Bibharti Avyaya. So he is inexhaustible. So he is infinite. He is without any limit. The jiva is infinitesimal. He is infinite, and he is the maintainer of the jivas. So that distinction again is made. One of the famous words Prabhupada quotes often is Nitya Nitya Naams, that amongst all the eternals, there is one eternal. So the jiva is also eternal, but Krishna is unique in this being eternal. Eko bahunamyo vidadati kaman. That he is the one person who is supporting the desires, the existence of everybody else. Right? So now we have a clear understanding of the two entities. We have the jiva, who can either be conditioned or liberated, and we have Krishna, who is supporting everybody. Next verse. Verse 18. Yasmaksharam atitoham aksharadape chotamaha atusmi loke vedecha pratita purushottamaha. Because I am transcendental, beyond both the fallible and the infallible, and because I am the greatest, I am celebrated both in the world and in the Vedas as that supreme person. So this is the verse that kind of gives the chapter the name. Krishna talks about Purushottam. So one of the names of the chapter, or the Sanskrit name of the chapter, is Purushottam Yoga. Previously, when Krishna had spoken about how he can be understood as the sun, the moon, and the fire, and expanded on that, he was talking about himself as Brahman. That those who are able to see Krishna everywhere, they see the all pervasive feature of Krishna, then it is the step towards Brahman realization. Then in the previous verse, Krishna had said that how he enters into everything, into this material world, and supports it. So that is the Paramatma feature. Here he talks about the Swayam Bhagwan feature, the Purushottama. So literally Purushottam means the Supreme Personality. Purush means personality and Uttama means the greatest. Right? So because Krishna says that I am beyond both the Kshara and the Akshara. So he is establishing his greatness compared to the Jivas. That I am beyond both the Kshara and the Akshara. Then he says that because I am the greatest, he is establishing his supremacy with respect to the Brahman and Paramatma that he had spoken about. So who is he? He says, I am Purushottama. Right? So essentially, Krishna is also introducing us to his three aspects by which he is realized as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Now, in terms of these verses, this three shloki talking about Sambandha Gyan, in the second half of the 17th verse, Krishna talks about how he is the one that is supporting the Jiva. So that essentially is the basis of Sambandha Gyan. Understanding who the Jiva is, who Krishna is, and what's the relationship between the two. So if we were to summarize 16, 17 and 18, Krishna in 16 talks about the Jiva as either being conditioned or liberated, Kshara or Akshara. That's the identity of the Jiva. Then Krishna talks about his own identity that is beyond the Jiva, that is beyond the Kshara and the Akshara. That is the cause of everything. So that is Krishna's identity. Then he talks about the relationship between Krishna and the Jiva, which essentially is that Krishna is supreme and the Jiva is infinitesimal. Krishna is the only one that is supporting, not the demigods, not even Paramatma. That's why Krishna says that I am the greatest, because even the Paramatma draws support from Krishna. The Brahman draws support from Krishna. So Krishna is the one that is supporting every aspect of the Jiva's relationship. So Sambandha Gyan is understanding one's own identity, that I am an eternal spiritual soul. At present point I am conditioned, but I can become liberated. Understanding Krishna's position as being the greatest, and understanding our relationship that we are fully dependent on Krishna. So with that understanding, Abhidaya follows. What does one do when develops that one understanding of the Sambandha? That comes in the next verse. Verse 19. Yo mam evam asamudho janati purushottamam sa sarvavid bhajati mama sarvabhavena bharata. Whoever knows me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead without doubting is the knower of everything. He therefore engages himself in full devotional service to me, O son of Bharat. So this verse talks about Abhidaya. So what does one do when he knows? So yoma meva asamudho. Asamudho means now the person is no longer confused. He clearly understands Sambandha. He clearly understands his relationship with Krishna. There is no doubt in him. Janati Purushottamam. He knows that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. What does he do? So sarvavid bhajati mama. Right? So such a person will now perform devotional service. So bhajati is the root word for bhakti, which means that such a person will now engage in devotional service. And what will be the mood? Sarva bhavena. That with complete engagement. He engages in full devotional service. Not Mishra Bhakti. Not that I will do a little bit of karma, a little bit of gyan, a little bit of yoga, but sarva bhavena, without any doubts. So this is the consequence of sambandha gyan. The person now begins to execute pure devotional service. So if you reverse engineer it, that when we see in our own lives, we are not able to execute pure devotional service, we execute either sadhana, Vaidhi Bhakti, Mishra Bhakti, because we are still struggling with sambandha gyan. We may academically understand it, but we have still not internalized it. So the process of bhakti is also that of purification. That as we execute bhakti, our sambandha gyan also becomes more and more refined. Okay. Next verse, which is the last verse of the chapter. Verse 20. Iti goyatamam shastram idam yuktam mayagaha etad bodhva buddhiman syat kritakrityascha bharata. This is the most confidential part of the Vedic scriptures, O sinless one, and it is disclosed now by me. Whoever understands this will become wise and his endeavors will know perfection. So last verse of the chapter gives us the conclusion and also the prayojan. So what happens to one who understands his relationship with Krishna perfectly, executes devotional service? Krishna says, Kritakyascha Bharata, and Etad Budva Buddhiman Shyat. Right? So he becomes wise and his endeavors will know perfection. So what is the perfection of one's endeavor? Pleasing Krishna. So for a devotee, this is the prayojan. This is the ultimate goal, which is to please Krishna. And Krishna addresses Arjun as Anaga. As Anaga means one without sin. So he says, my Anaga. So he says, this has been disclosed by me to you because you are sinless. So in a way, Krishna is now also establishing the basis by which one can traverse this part of Sambandha Abhidheya Prayojan, which is by giving up sins. So he had spoken about the sins in the first half of the chapter when he talked about the inverted tree and the transmigration of the jiva. All that is being fueled by the sin. What is the sin? The sin of desiring to enjoy separately from Krishna. It manifests in so many ways. It manifests in materially pious activities, materially sinful activities, but that's the original sin. When one gives up that sin, understands the relationship, executes devotional service, one becomes now qualified to attain endeavor in all perfections, which means that now one becomes the object of the mercy of the Supreme Lord. So this is the conclusion of the 15th chapter. So we'll end over here. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.